Thank you, audience, for staying with us as we come to the third and final panel discussion of this forum. For this session, again, please allow me to introduce the panel. President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, also known as Eurocham, Federico Donato. Group President and CEO of Blue Aqua International, a sustainable and environmentally friendly aquaculture solutions provider, Dr. Fashan Shisha-Shen. Founder and CEO of the Medical Concierge Group, a one-stop medical concierge service, Daniel Chu. And last but definitely not the least, we have RHT Law Asia partner and head of Consumer Brands Industry Group, Rizvi Woon. Moderating this final panel is Victor Tay, CEO of the China-ASEAN Business Alliance. Concurrently, Victor is also the CEO of Global Catalyst Advisory and MD of Stout Investment Banking, which is ranked first by Refinitiv in the US and second globally. Victor is based out of Stout Singapore office, focusing on Southeast Asia. The topic is moving the needle for a sustainable future in ASEAN. Can ASEAN leverage on the lessons from the EU, as well as its unique collaborative relationship within the region to drive the sustainability agenda in Asia? Over to you, Victor.
Yep. Hi. Thanks, Raymond, for the introduction. Thank you, and very much the topic. The panelists here had a huge topic to discuss with partnership for change. Partnership, that's where approach the means. Moving the needle, I think that's where we're looking at what are the challenges, what are the issues, what are the catalysts that will then move us towards a sustainable future, and the target region, ASEAN, which is the Southeast Asia nations, right? So a recap over COP26, I think what we had done there was extension over the declaration of the Paris Protocol target. We actually highlighted how we need to stay below 1.5 degrees for global warming. But as it is, I think we see a business as usual now. By 2021, we're probably 1.2 degrees higher in temperature. And by 2100, we are 2.7 degrees. And I think solution was in need. So COP26, we see there are quite a few outcomes and declarations there. Particularly, I like the part about partnerships where I think UK and India, PM Modi's highlighted about one sun, one world, one greed. Very much, I think we're one people, right? One earth that we actually protect, and therefore they look at, because a different region has different sun, a different solar yield and everything, so therefore they pipe to one grid. So that's partnership. We see where there are, for instance, introduction of mandatory climate-related company disclosure. UK is looking at that, and that's very much on regulations. Later on, our panelists will also talk about how regulations kicked in and how we balance that, where businesses want freedom, liberty, reduce compliance costs, and yet this is necessary, right, for awareness and compliance. The third part we see on the COP26 wise, financing. We saw the coalition of private sector putting 130 trillion vows to put climate at the heart of finance, right? And we know for things to move and for project to move, there was a need for financing. Without financing, it would be hard to mobilize and also capitalize. And the last part of it, we saw world leaders putting on promise to end deforestation by 2030. Very much regulations is required and policy change. So with that in mind, in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, so what have we done so far and what was the declaration? We saw Southeast Asian nations declared a green power links ahead of COP26. This is very much like solar panel grids. Singapore actually spearheading that together with our Southeast Asian nations. With that, where financing is concerned, 665 million has been put in by the Asian Development Bank to support green recovery in ASEAN. And also at the same time, for this, we saw world leaders promise the end of deforestation, but Southeast Asia yet to come in, right? So what are the reasons that we have not put in for this commitment? And there is a report that ASEAN risks losing 35% of GDP by 2050 if we don't actually scale up in terms of climate change, right? And at the end of it, we saw EU was supporting our green economic recovery in ASEAN, and that's why within us today, we had also a president of EU Chamber of Commerce who is here to allow us to look at these issues and also to be able to compare EU experience and so that we know how ASEAN can move to the power. So for today's discussion, very much you could see it's quite complex. We touch about from policies, regulations, compliance, ethics. We talk about would it be still in a new paradigm, government leading the way, or we need a private public partnership to lead this? And how about financing as well? I mean, we see UN, climate change, climate funds. But here it is, private funds have yet to come in because private funds do see that, but nonetheless, between impact financing and also in terms of financial return, surely in terms of climate change, they have not seen the full yield yet. And also, I think this touched on us on the technology and ecosystems as well, where perhaps the way to move forward to make it cheaper was to make sure that we had technology innovation and technology breakthrough. So with us today, we had Federico from President of EU Chamber of Commerce. He'll be talking about public-private sector lead green financing and probably comparing EU experience to ASEAN. We had also Dr. Farshad with us. He's a group president and CEO of Blue Aqua International. He'll probably be able to talk about sustainability opportunities, investment and financing in ASEAN. And we had Daniel Chu as well. Daniel is the founder and CEO of the Medical Concept Group. Very much he'll be talking about from sectoral point of view, industry adoption, sustainability, and also in terms of Indonesia and how Southeast Asia is adopting. And anchoring this, Rizwi, who's the head of Consumer Brands Industry Group and Intellectual Property Practice of RHD Law. He'll be talking about how maybe some of these areas that could actually have strengthened policies, regulations, compliance, or maybe even ethics that could be also slightly controversial as well. Right? So with this as a backdrop, let me then move towards the first discussion on then what are the opportunities within ASEAN? Are there areas that we can actually do more? And what are the bright sparks, right? So let us ask Dr. Farshad, who is actually running an aquaculture, agriculture part of this. Dr. Farshad.
Good afternoon and thank you. Directly go to the point is, I believe that COVID give us a very great lesson in terms of the understanding that what are the key and important, points in, human being life. Is it technology so important? Is it, food and food security is important? Is it health is important? Because I believe before COVID, we were rushing so fast about technology, doing a lot of things that may not be really considered the only single planet today we are living in. All the global warming and all those things come due to that. So I believe a lot of activity that we do have, especially in the ASEAN region, because we have a great population here. We have countries like China, a huge population that looking for the basic things, which is the, food. And a lot of our activity are related to the production of the food and feed. And I believe there are a lot of space to improve in terms of the food and feed production, because eventually, a huge population that we have here, they are looking to have a better, nutrition, which is one of the key concern of every human being. So it's definitely there are a lot of opportunity and space to work on this topic.
Yes, and apart from what you highlighted, sure, I think in terms of secure food chain, supply chain, and that very much has impact in terms of carbon emission and also reduction of the pollution as well, right? Especially in Southeast Asia. I think very much COP26 talk about that there are ample opportunities for deforestation. Would you have a few other showcases that Dr. Farshad that you can think about apart from these areas, right, on agriculture, feed, etc., that we can also then later on expand towards Daniel, who will then talk about from Indonesian angle. Yeah, Dr. Farshad.
Yeah, of course. Like you say like deforestation, all these things we are doing because for the business expansion. But sometimes we don't understand that every tree we cut and every, coral reef. Indonesia is one of the countries that, they're losing the coral population in the sea, and they are losing a lot of trees every day, in the land. And these are all eventually going to be resulting in the global warming. So these are definitely the area that it comes together with the food production and industry development. They all must consider the long-term and the sustainable way of approaching these things. But sometimes due to the, financial, education, training, a lot of things, it would be very difficult to transfer these things to the, to the down ground, to the people that actually are there. So education play a very important role. I mean, we can't really compare the European to the Asian. There's a lot of gap in terms of understanding all this sustainability and everything.
Yeah, so good point, Dr. Fasha raised. Indonesia, especially fourth largest world population, and India, ample opportunities, even down to deforestation, the forestry, stewardship, FSC, etc., and traceability of it. And also, I think Dr. Fasha talked about EU as well, the experience, etc. Let us go to Daniel before we go to listen from Federico about how EU had done it in the past, right? Yes, Daniel, would you want to give us a bit of a rundown on how Indonesia have been looking at in terms of sustainability since you are based there? Yeah, Daniel?
I think Indonesia, given, yes, Indonesia, has, I would say, done very well in the area of cutting down the use of plastics, right? And that's one of their ways of trying to help the environment. And you go to a shopping mall, you buy something, you're not getting a plastic bag, right? You go to groceries, no plastic bags. You got to buy, bring your own shopping bag, reusable bag. But on the flip side, what I see is a huge potential problem, and lots of plastics are being used, is that food deliveries, right? With the consumption of food, high food deliveries, more plastics are being used. Not just the plastic bags that are being brought to the home, but also the packaging. Styrofoam is being used. I think more can be done. Education, it's extremely important. I think education starts from the home. The leaders have to practice what they preach. I think this is a big problem. Countries are asking for support, financial support in green energy, etc. But they put a lot of obstacles in front of companies that want to come in the country. I think if the government, together with the private sector, can come together and do what's right for people. I mean, think about people. They think about their own children first, right? I think then you will see a much improved environment here.
Okay, so thanks. So we see Daniel in his Indonesian costume, a batik, traditional batik wear, and here is highlighting that plastic, right? So we have seen a lot of restriction on using of plastic, and plastic very much contaminates. It takes thousands of years before it can even disintegrate, right? So in this case, it's definitely toxic and harmful. But that's only just a very preemptive way of doing it. I think a lot more have been asked about in Southeast Asia. Can we do more? And especially in Indonesia, a lot have been highlighted about slash and burn practices when it comes to deforestation, and because there was lack of capital investment, and hence I think many of the smallholder farmers have been doing that. Daniel, would you have any other comments on those part of deforestation? And especially, I think we saw a few years ago, the Swedish Sovereign Fund actually looks at it and say, wow, if this part of the world have done things in the palm oil in such an unsustainable way, they probably will pull out the funds, right? Any thoughts or any news on what Indonesians are doing in this angle?
I think it's very easy to point a finger and put the blame on them. Now the question is, who is helping them, right? I know of several Singapore companies who've been trying to enter Indonesia to bring green energy to support Indonesia solutions that can convert waste into energy. But The challenge is to go through the hoops and hurdles in terms of regulatory, setting up the company, finding a reliable partner, and I hate to say this, but unless from the top down, the government decide does what's right, and we eradicate corruption, it's going to be a huge challenge, right? It's not the lack of companies willing to come in, but I think the government has to make a concerted effort, right, together with companies who want to come in, who want to import their technology, right? And there's going to be a lot of investments, right, from these companies, and they want the government to support them. So, in my opinion, it all starts with the government, and it's a huge challenge because every 4 years, every 2 terms, a new government comes in, new policies change, right? Again, slash and burn. Is Indonesia entirely at fault? Well, we know corporate companies own these companies, right? These plantations. So, are these companies being held accountable for what's happening in Indonesia?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the commentary. That I think that's why we saw the headlines about does ASEAN risk losing 35% of GDP by 2050 if in terms of climate change and some of its practices unchanged, right? And of course, I think when the palm oil is concerned, we've seen the roundtable of the palm oil owners, and they basically were able to demarcate out, and basically nowadays they had even Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and actually require some of this to have certs, a sustainable cert. If this were from origin or source, they are not sustainable. They practically don't buy from them. So that probably give restrictive measures on some of them who actually resort to such practice. But here it is, I think, what Daniel is alluding to, and very much we saw even Bangladesh and India highlighted at COP26, they highlighted about climate justice. They basically highlighted that climate justice itself, where some of this more developed country at times outsource some of this carbon emission activities down to maybe the South Asia and all the rest. So with that, maybe let's move towards Federico, right? EU had a long way when it comes to environmental practices. And this, since 1970s, at the foresight of it, they had been embracing environmental technologies. They came out with regulations on 3R, reduction, recycling, even down to the vending machines, bottles that can be returned and then they return you money. And also in terms of, they had restriction of hazardous substances and WEEE, waste, electrical, electives policies. This actually entrenched what it is now, the leadership of environmental practices in EU. Maybe Federico can give us a comparison of what you have done and also point towards where the opportunities that ASEAN can do.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I do believe Europe is enjoying today a certain leadership, not only in terms of technology and innovation in the sustainability aspects, but also, as you mentioned, in terms of standard setting, regulation, and the way we try to understand whose company is sustainable and which one is not. I think what's interesting, if you mentioned the 70s, I think that Europe started from an extremely ideological debate, and what I'm pleased to see, or to have seen in the years that brought us from 1970 until today, is that the evolution of this has been an evolution that has brought us to speak more about business, less about slogans, and I think that the journey has been a long one. So yes, we are enjoying a leadership, but on the other side, I think the opportunity for countries that today are looking at this is that even if they start from a disadvantageous starting point, they also can avoid many mistakes that has been done in the past. So I think that we always has to be, yes, the government has an important role, but we have also to be careful not to over-regulating, and we never have to forget the business angle. And I really want to insist here, the previous panelist was mentioning education, and I think certainly it's very important. In fact, when I was growing up in the 80s in Europe, these aspects were starting to be taught to children, from families in school, In Singapore, if you look at the Singapore Green Plan 2030, one of the key ministry involved in the plan is the Ministry of Education. You don't move much far without education being involved. That's for sure. But on the other side, where are the opportunities, you ask me? I think that, okay, first of all, ASEAN is a very diverse environment. You go from countries like Myanmar to countries like Singapore, and obviously there is a world of difference. In Singapore, if you look at it, for example, you have strong opportunities in electric vehicles. Singapore is probably the easiest place you can think on earth where you can deploy easily public transport to be fully electric on buses, on taxis, and some of it is happening. All around Southeast Asia, I think including Indonesia and Malaysia, you have opportunities in solar. A lot of countries are deploying solar very big floating farms in the sea, including Singapore, and others can look at hydro. So you really have a lot. But allow me to end on a more, I don't know if provocative or a little bit more out of the box argument. That's government can do as much, and opportunity can be in certain sectors. But at the end of the day, I think that we have to resonate with what consumer wants. And consumers are showing globally an increasing interest, consumer and investors, in for investor, ESG compliant product, we will see it later, or for company who are sustainable in their supply chain and in their activity. But even for consumer, there is a strong push of having a product which are more aligned to their liking. And believe me, it's changing very, very, very fast, to the extent that in many countries, in many evolved countries, but it's moving fast even to less developed countries, people are even choosing companies to work for based on their sustainable agenda. There are 40% of the millennials for whom the sustainable agenda of a company is one of the paramount choice that has been looked before you choose to work for someone. So plenty of opportunities, in my opinion, in Southeast Asia, not only relegated to government responsibility, but also on what companies can, and there are already some champions companies in various countries that are doing important steps on sustainability.
Yes, so we hear that opportunities here, transport, plenty of it, right? We can reduce transport, the carbon emission goes down. And we see even in ASEAN and in China, they were looking at the link from Nanning, Guangxi, that goes all the way cutting through Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, all the way down to Singapore. If that comes true, that probably can reduce a lot of those carbon footprint arriving from some of the vehicles. And of course, EV vehicles. And I guess Federico highlighted, Singapore now is the home to Hyundai, who actually will be doing its EV vehicle manufacturing here. So there's a great footprint that we'll be able to then cascade over and therefore reduce some of this diesel or even some of this traditional fuel automotives. And therefore, a lot more solar panels as well. I think Singapore had actually tried to lay even small footprint as we are. We try to use our water reservoir and therefore had one of the largest solar panels overlaying on top of on water bodies in order to have electrical yield. So that's something that opportunities you can look at. Thanks that Federico has highlighted. And this brings us to two discussion points, right? That just now where Daniel highlighted that maybe government should do more. And because here this private sector have lesser participation, right? And therefore maybe regulation and policy is one of those to actually be able to sway behavior. And Federico highlighted that maybe not just that, we should get more private sector in. And private sector won't like regulations as it is, right? That's one train of discussion. The other train of discussion about financing. Financing could actually be the dog that wags the tail, right? Rather than the other way around. So financing moves behavior too. So maybe on the first train of thought on regulations and policies. And this brings us to Rizwi, right? That what do you think about it? I mean, Daniel highlighted. So Indonesia is a large country. Here it is, private sector participation, governance, etc. And here it is in EU example was maybe that wasn't enough on policies and regulations. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes. Okay. From where I sit as head of consumer brands and also looking at things from a legal perspective, I try to look at things from how effective a regulation should be to achieve the stated purpose. So, if I can just cite the example of what I've seen in South Korea. Now, I understand that in 1995, their food recycling was maybe about 2%. But somehow by 2019, they had achieved 95% food recycling. And this was in part largely due to a new law which they introduced in 2013 to mandate all households to actually recycle food wastage. And also, there was also a large contribution by some innovation technology in terms of smart dustbins to actually collect the food. But I think that is a very good example of how you can actually shape conduct, influence people to actually follow a certain course of action to achieve a stated objective. And I think if that can be done, especially like in modern times, like in Korea, I don't see why it cannot be achieved in other countries as well. Even now, for example, like Singapore, I think last year, this year, we introduced this concept of mandatory packaging reporting. Right? I believe the purpose is actually to shape the thinking and the conduct of retailers and small businesses to actually be more aware of the amount of packaging waste, plastics, paper, polystyrene, all those materials, right? Shape their thinking is how to actually reduce the amount put in circulation and to maybe rely more on recycling. I'm actually glad to see that all of these steps are being taken by the various governments to actually shape the conduct. But if you ask me, I would say that these are instances where regulation can actually shape the way you have an intended objective and hopefully help to achieve a more environmentally friendly region.
Yes, I think you hear it from Rizvi that the Korean example and a few others, right, accelerates the entire environmental adoption and protection. Food recycling, and immediately Korea, 95% adoption rate, great, right? And I guess Singapore has been through the process in the past of, in terms of legislation over how we should recycle or maybe how we should put things in a bin, if not, etc. So from fine, etc., they evolve us to be. And so there are regulations that does it, or there are ways to use incentives. So maybe let us talk at incentives, right? Later on, we'll come back and talk about policies, governance, and maybe even areas like plastic, how we can do it, etc. So later we'll come back to Rizvi on it. So the other train of thoughts about this was incentives, financial, right? Financial. Are there enough financial to motivate people? Daniel just now was saying that, yeah, but Indonesia, I mean, we're looking at a small farm hole, and these guys have no money to buy tractors. They have no electric saw. They don't have the resources. They're only one whole family that actually in charge of whole hectares of land, and they have actually got to saw them down. And so with just ignition of a match, they solve the problem, right? So are there enough financing to help them in this case? And I guess let us come back to Dr. Farshad, right? Who is in sustainability, a practitioner here, and he's also an investor too. Are there enough sustainability funds, right? There have been a lot of them highlighting this were NGO funds, UN, climate financing, and private sector was slow to come in because the returns were not high. So Dr. Farshad, as a practitioner, as someone who also invests in sustainability, so what are your thoughts on this? Are there gaps in here?
Thank you. Yes, definitely there is a gap because when you look, you see, when you want to do the things that related to the sustainability and taking care of environment and all those, these always come with a cost. And not every business owners, they are willing to do that because, number one is they don't see the benefit. That goes back to the earlier discussion about the education. And the second one goes back to what is the financial cost on that for the business owner. But I like to mention one very important point here also, like when you look at the South Asia, ASEAN countries, many of them, in the reality, they are a poor country. So when you go and even tell the government, support sustainability, support green approach, they may say they have much more, important agenda in their book. So these are become, when we compare to Singapore, even in Singapore as a company that we have a lot of farming activity, doing a lot of things that we can really be green. I think still the policies are not there. The financial supports are not there. They are not yet clear, because sometimes the definition of the being a clean and green, being a sustainable, it's very, very different. Sometimes we do have meeting, a lot of, audience, they use the word of sustainability. So my first question always is that, how do you define it? What does it mean by that? Can you explain how you see the sustainability? Yes, we do have a certain, definition by UN, by UNDP and all those things. But sometimes in every market, there would be a different understanding. I just want to say very, very short, example of this, and I will pass again to you, Rita. Many years ago, because we are very famous in shrimp industry. Everywhere in the world, people know us very well. I never forgot, I was in Mexico, and there was one of my friends, he's a very, very famous gentleman in the, they call it like this, certification and all those things. So they came and say they want to put Thai farmer, in a group that they are using a child labor. So in the US, they want to ban them of importing the product that come from Thailand, because Thai shrimp farmer, they are using children to work in the farm. And then what I say, I think you already, not really see the actual sense, because those Thai farmers, you see, they're using the children. Actually, they are their own kid, because in Thailand, the farms are so small, they're family owned. And of course, in your house, kids wash, dish, help the parents. Over there, people helping the parents to run the very small farm. So this brings that sometimes the definition that comes from those developed countries, when they want to apply the rule and regulation and those definitions to the countries that they don't have that kind of mindset, it's create a lot of conflict. And sometimes they become even against it. They don't want to listen. They don't want to, really, really follow that, because they see this is not what I believe. You come and tell me I cannot ask my own kid to help me. So you see, that's creating a clear and global, meaningful, definition for all these things, which not only governments and educated people understand, because they are not the one practicing this. Those people that they are sitting at the ground level, they have to practice. Otherwise, it will not be successful. That's in my opinion, is a very key factor.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Fasha, for highlighting, right? So one is, there are funds, a lot are government-driven, NGOs-driven, and there are conditions and criteria, like even Daniel highlighted, companies jump through hoops and hops to qualify, right? And I think in terms of UN climate financing, they look at impact, lives, number of lives saved or impacted, or even carbon footprint that were elevated, etc. So in here, I think what's missing is, what about the private sector financing? What about the green bonds? What about some of this PE, or even some of the family office financing, right? And that's to bring us to Federico, who then probably could, who's also in the bank sector, looking at on the wealth management, wealth banking as well. So maybe Federico, may want to comment on this?
Well, it is clear that for the amounts that we are requested or required to spend from estimation that we have, to either go down by 1.5 degrees or to whatever indicator you want to take, the money that is expected to be spent in order to be compliant with the target that we have given ourselves, it cannot be closed by governments alone. It cannot be closed by multilateral agency alone. It cannot be closed by World Bank or Asian Development Bank alone. So we cannot expect that it's only public funding. There is a massive opportunity in private funding, and there is a massive opportunity in private markets. Being that equity market, and I'm going probably to talk about mainly listed companies, so it might not apply to all what we're trying to discuss, but definitely there is a very strong argument showing how much money is going from the private market. If you take as a reference that from 2004 to 2014, the amount of money in so-called ESG compliant product has grown 10 times. There is indeed a very strong business case to show that investors are looking at what we call ESG compliant products. So of companies that are considered as companies that are applying sustainable metrics and that are behaving in a sustainable, defined manner. So the same thing is happening to the bond market. Is a bit less rampant than in the equity, or it started later, but the acceleration is very strong. So there is a massive amount of money, and that's happening. And I would like to stress one concept. We always relate to the fact green is costly, being sustainable is costly. I have to lose money before I make money. False. Sorry, false. It might be true to some arguments. It may be true in some industry, but it's not true at large. And in finance, it's not true for sure. The majority, there are many studies, one from Morningstar, showing that an overwhelming majority of the so-called ESG compliant funds has outperformed regular funds. This trend accelerated during COVID. And in the last 2 years, ESG compliant fund or ESG labeled fund lost less during the downturn and recuperated faster. The majority of relative majority of ESG compliant fund outlast 10 years of age more than the so-called traditional funds. So there is a false argument to believe always that green is costly, and the cost actually could be seen in the reverse. The companies who don't decide to become sustainable risk to be out of the market, and that would be the real cost, because they will find to be dinosaur very fast, and they will be pushed out of the market, either by investor or by consumer. What I want to conclude on investor is that there are plenty of avenues. Institutional investor, you mentioned family office, but institutional investor have a duty, being them pension funds, family offices, or many others, to have in their portfolio a certain percentage of ESG compliant product. That percentage is different from country to country, but it's a growing component, and they are looking for that, being helped by the fact that they are performing very well, and so they are increasing their percentage. Secondly, if you look at private wealth and if you look at private money, you have an increasing interest from private investors to buy more compliant, sustainably compliant product, and that even more apparent in the millennials and the generation of the younger people. If you look to the fact that there is a massive transition of wealth in many countries, including our own here in Singapore, where a third generation of entrepreneurs is taking over, or generation of people who are 40 and below, for these people, the sustainable cause is more important, and these people are going massively into ESG. So if you're not doing anything there, the real cost you will have is that you will be either out of business or out of money. So in my opinion, you better try to come to the conclusion that it's better to move fast and sooner rather than later, because if you don't, if the investor will not come for you, and you will be punished and out of the market.
Yes, thanks for Federico passionately putting across about this aspect of, if you are not embracing ESG, looking forward in the next few decades or the next lap of business, you will no longer be valid. And consumers, investors are looking at, are you putting the ticks? Are you actually being sustainable? Are you actually fulfilling a certain climate change criteria? I was in the UNGC, United Nations Global Compact, and in there we were actually trying to get Singapore SGX in 2014 to be mandatory in sustainable reporting, and we finally did. Of course, surely when we first did it, a lot of them were saying that by making it mandatory, actually it's a high compliance cost. But nonetheless, that gives a characteristic to SGX that we are now comprising of all those who are sustainable. And now, of course, you realize that the rest of the world are making it mandatory too. And this brings us to the next question of sustainable reporting, compliance, policies, right? And I'm coming to Rizvi, and after that, I'm going to go to Daniel too. And particularly because today, this forum is also marked the inauguration and the launch of RHT Grace. And Grace very much is one that actually look at governance, compliance, ethics, right? So before I go to Daniel, let Rizvi maybe just expand on this as well, on the policies, governance, ethics. Thank you.
Okay. So before I actually proceed, I would actually like to reinforce what Federico just said about the appeal to the modern consumer of having a environmentally supportive or environmentally friendly line of business. Because I believe from what we've seen, quite a few businesses are actually using the fact that they are environmentally friendly, or they have environmentally friendly practices as part of their selling point when they're selling products. And especially nowadays when you are catering to a generation of consumers who are millennials, okay? For some of them, this is actually a crucial selling point. I recently came across a market survey of consumers from the States. They actually said that being environmentally friendly is one of the important factors they will actually look at when they consider whether or not to A, choose a supplier or a retailer, or even B, switching brands as when necessary because of their own preferences. So I think it's actually quite a very valid point to make. Okay, so in line with this, I think it's very heartening to see that sustainability reporting is actually part of the process of listed companies, like in Singapore, and I believe in other countries as well. They actually make it part of the reporting requirements of listed companies as what are the sustainability efforts they are actually putting into place. Now, I understand that it's not mandatory to have such practices, but it's mandatory to report whether or not you have such practices. Now, hopefully, the mindset will change, and it won't be just mandatory to report, but mandatory to have such practices in the first place. Okay. Yeah, again, like I said, all of this just demonstrates how increasingly these sort of issues are becoming more relevant, more important, and more crucial, right? Especially when you are looking at, say, the future of companies and what sort of factors you will want to look at when you see how companies progress and see whether or not your investment in such companies is actually bearing fruit.
Okay. Yes. So I think we need a starting point: sustainable reporting, and of course, reporting just like the COP26 and also the Paris Protocol, right? When countries have to disclose and they have nothing to disclose, that's quite an embarrassment. So, in listed company as well, there's a need to, and you had, as what Federico highlighted, your consumer investor looking at it. Where's your ESG? What are you doing in these activities? And if you're not, they will be diverting because this typically will show that you're not sustainable, right? So let us then go to Daniel. And Daniel is also sitting on the committee of HT Grace Institute. And Daniel, very much in terms of compliance, governance, ethics, what are your commentary and what are your perspective of it? Daniel, please.
We can put governance in place, right? We can set rules, we can set compliance in place. I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to ethics. In Grace, you realize ethics at the end, but in reality, if you put ethics in front of everything you do, then you are practicing what you preach. So I'll quote an example. I'm in the healthcare business, I entered this. We entered the market as the medical concierge, where the industry's practice, right, was to take a commission, a referral fee from doctors and hospitals, and that's easy. It's an easy business to do. But what was difficult for us was to say, no, we will not take that path. And we've been approached by many practitioners offering us commissions, referral fees. I will always say no. We work in the best interest of clients. Now, similarly, I think in all business practices, right? If companies start thinking about how their business is impacting society, the environment, people, take those step backs forward and say, what can we do to improve it? How can we change the way we conduct our business? There are no easy answers, there are no easy solutions, but every small step that company takes can make that change. So I would say to everybody, climate change is everybody's responsibility. When we encourage overconsumption, we impact the environment. When we produce more cars, we're going to emit more carbon. Then we say, yeah, we can look at electricity, but then again, renewable energy, electric cars, but this would also in turn create the need for produce more energy. So if we can come together, reduce consumption, I think we'll see a better environment for all of us.
Yes, thanks Daniel for the commentary. And then we are about opening to the floor to ask questions. So while you are trying to put in your question, let me then just summarize a little bit of the stream of discussion we had, right? If you're following us, we talk about opportunities in ASEAN. And I think we hear from Federico basically highlighted, look at our transport, look at our solar panel, look at our traditional coal-powered station. I think we could actually replace that. That's one huge possibility to do it. And we actually highlighted deforestation. And some of this, we can actually look at education awareness. And that's where Daniel highlighted. But of course, he also highlighted, then where are the financing? If the financing is not there, then put in regulations, right? So therefore, I think we went on to talk about regulations and policies. Federico highlighted, but businesses, I would think that that's actually expensive compliance costs. But Rizui highlighted that, look at the Korean example, it's fast, right? 95% actually when adopting for food recycling. So some of this, it could be a quick wins. And then we hear from Dr. Farshad, who then highlighting from financing angle. Financing NGOs at one of it, but sustainable financing should also come from private sector. And Federico also supplemented to say, yes, these days, it is actually, sustainable financing doesn't mean you're losing money. Or actually, in fact, in this case, nowadays, they are more sustainable than those who are on fossil fuels or all those traditional companies, right? So therefore, with that particularly is our three streams of discussion. And plus the last part, we kind of from Rizui to Daniel highlighting, if all fails, if financing fails, regulation fails, ethics, you are supposed to drum in on this beat. After all, businesses as first incorporated, like what Morgan Freeman say, right? Has a corporate social responsibility. You're supposed to actually do something towards fulfilling the responsibility apart from profit. Right, so therefore, that's something that a few lines of stream of talk. Do we know if, are we able to see the chat? Any audience who are asking any questions? If there are, let us know. And if not, okay.
Can I bring an example that is very interesting of partnership that works between government and the economy? And I don't take a European example, so I'm trying to be very objective. In 2006, Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, passed a legislation, Global Warming Act. And the legislation was prescribing by 2020, to cut emission down to the level of 1990. 10 years later, so in 2016, California, which is a relevant example because it's the 7th biggest GDP in the world, 40 million people, in a country where the sustainable agenda was never a priority. They had a Republican president back then, Republican governor Schwarzenegger in a democratic state, so the political arena was complicated. They passed a legislation. 10 years later, California had bigger growth than US, bigger GDP per capita, less emission per capita, and more energy efficiency. So that tells you that you can, and they achieve higher economic growth. So you can achieve higher economic growth, you can achieve to give jobs to people, and it doesn't mean that you go green and therefore you're losing money or for some reason you have to subsidize forever. So fast forward today, compared to California, we have much cheaper back in 2006. So it's true, less developed countries has less money, but it's also true that solar today costs a fraction of what solar costed 20 years ago. So you have more viable solution. So I think the conversation has to start from example where the California example is a powerful one because things can work hands in hands between government and people.
Yes, that's a great example, right? Yes.
something here.
Yeah.
You know,
Dr.
Faisal,
Farshad.
I agree with you. But what again I insist, I believe that, you know, if you look at the South Asia, you know, like you look at like Myanmar, you look at even Thailand, you look at even Indonesia. Indonesia has 17,000 islands. How to reach to those islands, how to really get the people that even they don't know how to read and write. I mean, example of California, yes, is for the developing countries is absolutely correct. You know, I know, it's no question about it. But you see, I give you an example of Singapore. You see, in Singapore, tomorrow you come and put in the wet market a product that produced in a sustainable way, and you ask for a 50% higher or even 20% or 30% higher, and you put a local, you know, imported product from Malaysia that does not have even any brand. I can assure you, majority of the market will go for the cheaper product. So even in Singapore, that we are very advanced. So I am a bit puzzled here how we can even bring a topic of sustainability to the countries that they don't have even infrastructure, they don't have even a road, they don't have even a, you know, access to the basic education. You see, that will be basically the responsibility of the government to start from the higher angle, looking at the bigger picture. I mean, you go and tell the Indonesian islander that, okay, you know, from tomorrow you don't use plastic. Okay. I mean, is that really solve the problem? No. The issues are much more bigger. You see, when you go and tell Indian or Chinese that don't use coal, then the point is here, they must have a replacement for that. I mean, he said, okay, I don't use. I mean, we are talking about solar power. Okay, for the past 3 years, I want to set up a solar power in my farm, in my operation in Singapore. The cost is more higher than if I use the grid power. You see, it is not always as beautiful looks as, you know, we assume. There are a lot of bumpy road down the, you know, reaching to the goal, and that is what sometimes we confuse. I mean, an example of a Thailand, you know, child labor is a real story, and it's very difficult for a lot of people to understand that. What do you mean by that? So you go and educate that parents and say, oh, you know, you're going to be penalized because you ask your kid use here, or you're going to get penalized because you are using a diesel in your farm. He said, okay, I don't use diesel. What else I have? So I believe the process, the direction is correct, but setting a goal and a timeline must be very realistic. And it must come with education, different options for the people, giving them the benefit of the doubts for the people that they don't know the things. Okay, I'm sorry, maybe I took too long.
No, not at all. I think those are real practical issues, and I guess what Dr. Farshad highlighted is the commencement of any new journey is always difficult, right? And the Chinese had this saying that the commencement of a 10,000 journeys, right? It actually starts with the first step. So I guess in here he's saying it's difficult, it's challenging, it's expensive. So to this, before later on, I'll say what did China do in this area. Maybe let Federico to highlight in here. What do you think of the comment?
No, I agree. My comment on California was saying that, was referring to the fact that the will is important because many developed countries didn't even do what they did. So I'm saying you have to start from a strong and deep commitment. But I agree with you, and the risk we are running today, unfortunately, we don't have a whole afternoon to debate about it, but the risk we have and where we have to strive is to see a convergence over time of what is required, because I agree with you, it's unfair today to expect from country A the same as country C that are at two totally different level of evolution, as much as is probably not completely unspeakable for a financial institution to apply the same rule of financing of a company in a less developed country than in a very developed country when it comes to sustainability. So I share it with you. I think education plays a big part, but nevertheless, it doesn't hurt to start bringing on the agenda and start to ideally help companies to transition to new form and to new technology.
Yes, and I fully agree with what Dr. Farshad has said, and I draw example later on from one in Singapore, China, and later on Bangladesh. I was in Enterprise Singapore looking after environmental sector. That's 2005, and that was way ahead of time, like 16 years ago. And then we're talking about sustainable aircon and sustainable inverter aircon and inverter fridge. It was more expensive than a normal one. Nobody's want to buy and say, why am I spending money on it? Electricity is cheap. But now this is no brainer, right? Everyone say inverter aircon, an inverter fridge is a must have. A 3 ticks from NEA or a 4 ticks. If without, I'm not going to buy. And that brings me to China, right? China definitely has been a net energy importer and also net fossil fuel user of the whole world. But I think they had actually also turned around when they become now the largest clean technology user adopter, the largest solar panel adopter, the largest wind energy adopter. They sure still have coal energy, but I think they had a foresight to say eventually it'd be very expensive. Therefore, they adopted this. And this brings me to my third example of Bangladesh. I saw Bangladesh came out in COP26, basically highlighting that they said climate justice. They highlighted Bangladesh is facing coastal, high areas where flood is rampant. And in there, they face cyclone. And people in there, it's a vicious cycle, right? Because of the flood, they lose their homes. They basically have to become nomadic. Because they're nomadic, they lose their farm agriculture. And therefore, they're poor. They had no education. It's a downward spiral. And I saw the new example they gave was because of the water, therefore, why not they convert into aquaculture or maybe even doing oyster harvesting, right? So I think where it is, I find it quite resilient where some of these challenging places, they can turn Achilles heel towards a strength. And I guess here it is in Singapore too. We buy water from Malaysia. And I think to do recycling water is extremely expensive. We put where it's expensive in, but nonetheless, we now become a huge showcase to the rest of the world with the largest recycling household water to demonstrate to the rest of the world. And with that, we export technology too. So that's something food for thought to think about. But Dr. Farshad brings another important point of ethics I'm going to bring to Rizvi. And Dr. Farshad highlighted about ethics in this case, and even like the Thai farmers and everything. And when their children underage are actually being deployed there as resources. Is that an issue? But nonetheless, surely by certain international standard, there's abuse of manpower, of children or manpower. But nonetheless, it's within a family business, right? Is that a problem? Rizvi, since we're talking about ethics, there's another train of thoughts that we can get people to move towards sustainability. Rizvi.
Okay. I think what Dr. Farshad said about education and awareness is actually quite key in this respect. Sometimes I believe you use the word, like you use like child abuse and all, use that word, but sometimes it may be culture, it may be tradition that it doesn't appear to the those families or that culture that is a form of abuse. It may be just something that has been always been done throughout, you see. And this is where again I come back to regulation, regulation and shaping conduct and all that. And then in a way it can become like a tool for education, right? You make people aware, you make people realize that actually there is another better way of achieving the same end result, right? And then the regulation forces people to behave in a certain way. And after a while, when you ingrain the sort of thinking, then you realize actually there are always alternatives. And this is where I believe, as some of the examples that I've raised, this is where I believe that you can actually shape future conduct. And it may not be a solution for all the problems that are arisen, but it could provide a solution to some of the problems and to actually address some of these concerns that you talk about ethics, and at the same time maybe also see whether we can solve some of the problems relating to the environmental concerns. Okay, so again, like I said, I only look at the effectiveness of some of the regulations resulting in the conduct of parties, consumers, retailers, even households. And I see that actually done correctly with the correct objective in mind, it can actually achieve the objective that you wish to achieve. right? I mean, it may be a little draconian to force people to behave through mandatory obligations and through laws. But if the end result is actually what you desire and the means of reaching there is quite painless, shall we say, there's a little bit of inconvenience, a little bit of cost. I think if you balance everything, it might be worth it. Well, I think that's where I look at it.
Yes, that's right. That's a good comment from Rizwi, right? And to our last, I mean, no questions from our audience. And before I get one last round of commentary from everyone, right? In the sequence of Dr. Farshad, Daniel, Rizwi, and Federico, especially from how EU looks at ASEAN and opportunities, right? Let me then, before I go to everyone, and as everyone are thinking about how you want to summarize this, let me also give a bit of a summarizing of what we have discussed so far, right? Bright sparks, we highlighted, right? Transport, energy, solar panel, and many others, right? That's one way. A few train of thoughts, how to tip that moving needle to become highlighted. Yeah, let's go with financing. And that's where Dr. Farshad and Federico say that's the way to go. At the same time, I think we do hear Daniel highlighting, but financing one thing, but jumping through hops and hoops. How about in terms of regulation? So Rizwi highlighted regulation is effective. Quick win, do it. And then where all fails, Daniel kind of highlighted ethics. Ethics is important, right? Everyone must know from our heart that we should not be raping the earth further or resources and draining it. That's unsustainable. And your consumers are looking at us on how we do it, right? And so here it is: financing, regulation, ethics, and also I think on addressing the issue of partnership for change. I actually just now Federico highlighted a good example from Los Angeles, right? That that's how then Mayor Arnold Schwarzenegger had done, and basically had it push ahead with partnership, private public, and therefore push ahead of time, and that also gives them a certain yield. And of course, there are challenges too. Of course, not everything is all a bed of roses, and of course, Dr. Farshad highlighted practical problem, right? Financing, right? So yes, let us start with Dr. Farshad, then Daniel, then Rizwi, then later on Federico to summarize it. Then Dr. Farshad, thank you.
I believe sustainability and looking at the environment and everything is extremely important, because I personally believe for now we have only one planet to live. I don't know, another 20-30 years we can find somewhere else to deploy some people and continue the humanity, but for now we need to take care of our blue planet. But in the other hand, also, I believe all the solutions must come in the very practical and approachable, rather than just wording and some definition that when you really go down to the execution, they don't work. So I think practicality and also the standards. Like sometimes it doesn't need to start everything from the best. You just start from a first step, go to the second step. So slowly the things would be better. I think that's what I would like to summarize.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Farshad. One Earth, one planet, and that's for all of us are living in had a joint responsibility. Yes, Daniel, what's your comment on this to summarize it all?
I think climate change starts with me. If all of us starts have this mantra in us that climate change, saving this environment, saving this planet starts with me, and we all do our small bit. We all make that effort, right? And not just talk, not just having these conferences and and another conference, nothing will change. But if we start teaching ourselves and tell ourselves, our children, that climate change begins with me, and ask ourselves, do I need this? Do I, do I take a public transport, or do I take, own a car? I think we'll have a better planet.
Yes. So thank you, Daniel. Highlighted ethics, mantra, and therefore inculcating it as a habit. That's something we do daily, right? That's something that we ought to do. It's part intrinsic within us. Yes, and Rizwi, what are your thoughts on this?
actually what I have to say is like quite similar to what Daniel is Daniel said, but in a slightly different way. See, like why I emphasize quite a bit on mandatory obligations under the new law is from our own experience when we are helping clients with mandatory packaging reporting under the Resources Sustainability Act. Through the journey, right, when we were helping the clients and all that, doing all the reporting, finding out the data, collating it, and what have you, you come to realize that there is actually a higher purpose for all of this work, all of this additional work, um, all of this additional effort to collate the information. The information per se is actually not as important as the purposes for which the information is collected and therefore used as a basis to formulate policy in the future. And I think indirectly, you come to realize, you come to learn, you come to understand why it is important to know all of these things, the use of or the amount of plastic, paper, what have you, that's used in packaging, and then B, why it is also important to think about reduction, recycling, and reusing it. So to me, that's one of the more important takeaways. You actually come to realize, you come to learn, and you say, okay, since this is apparently very important, it wasn't important or obvious to me previously, but it's suddenly become very important. Then I realized that, hey, use this knowledge, right? Reduce it, reduce waste, manage waste management, bring it down to zero, right? Help the environment. As what Dr. Fasha said, this is our home, right? There's nowhere else to go. So if we don't take care of it, who's going to take care of it?
Yes, and that evolves from the mantra, the ethics, down to, I think that's where certain industries say, let's come up with a code of conduct. A code of conduct when you cannot, let's come up with guidelines. So it's not legislated, right? These are guidelines to do well. And with that only in last resort, and people are still not following, then let's legislate it and regulations, right? And that's where what Rizvi is coming from. And with this, we come to the anchor person. And because I think Federico's come from EU, stays in ASEAN for a while, and therefore maybe able to marry the best of both worlds. What are your comments and what are your final advice or summary to everyone? Thank you.
Well, to me, really, there are three key stakeholders here: governments, investors, and consumers. Ethics is important, goodwill is important, but ultimately we cannot expect go on subsidizing, go on loss-making businesses. So we have to come from the angle that with all the differences between, of course, developed countries and less developed countries, but we have to come to the understanding that the three stakeholder: consumer will want sustainable product, investor want to invest in ESG to make more money, and government need to try to move a needle in cutting the carbon emission as they pledged. I think there is a convergence among these. It's not easy. We need nuances and helping a transition in the less developed countries, but ultimately we are here to make sure that we progress forward, not as a dead cost, but as an opportunity to make business, to give jobs, and to make the sustainable business opportunity a viable one.
Yes, well summarized, and thank you. That brings us back to the title of what it is. I think to move the needle for the sustainable future, sustainable financing, important, regulations and compliance, ethics, that's where our own knowledge on how to do this. And the last part, which is what is called partnership for change. And I think well summarized from Federico, that is the partnership of government, private partnership, also the people, all three in one. And after all, we are all staying with that single earth as our only resources. There's no second planet. So with this round of applause to our panelists, and thank you. It's a very complex topics, but nonetheless, we had it all addressed to a certain point. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Fantastic session. Thank you, Victor and panelists, for the invigorating discussion.